Women, with their sure instincts, realized that my intention was to make them not just more beautiful, but also happier. Dior is much more than a name, much more than a brand, a dressmaker, a designer, a fashion house, a celebrity, or a person. Dior is a spirit that transcends his era. His legacy is part of our time and will be here after we are gone. 70 years have passed by since this emblematic French brand was founded, and it is a perfect opportunity to celebrate 7 decades of history, art, culture, fashion, and style. The public history of Dior began in tough post-war France at the beginning of 1947. On a cold February morning, Paris experienced a wave of glamour. An unknown Christian Dior presented a fashion show with a collection that would change the parameters of women's high fashion for years to come. And in this way, the phenomenal brand that excited women in Europe and the USA was born, while at the same time contributing to the recuperation of the textile industry. But let's start from the beginning of this great designer's life to have an in-depth look at his story. Christian Dior was born in Granville, France, on the 21st of January in 1905. He was the second of 5 children born into a wealthy provincial Norman family. He lived his grammar and secondary school years within a normal family environment. When he was older, he studied at École des Sciences Politiques in Paris with the intention of becoming a diplomat, as per his father's wishes. He also studied music, though he was always fascinated by architecture and art, especially painting. He had a clear vocation towards beauty in all its manifestations. His greatest passion from the very beginning was drawing and design. Though he never became a diplomat, the culture he acquired, his knowledge of proper etiquette, protocol, history, and geography, gave him great polish and education that allowed him to navigate the sophisticated waters among the aristocracy and nobility. A Parisian at heart, he opened his first gallery in Paris after graduating in 1928. He used money that his father loaned him for a number of years. In 1932, he became a partner owner of another gallery, which exhibited the work of some of the greatest names in art of the time, and which influenced his creativity. Here one could find the works of Pablo Picasso, Georges Braque, Max Jacob, and even Jean Cocteau. However, by the middle of the 1930s, his life hit a cycle of bad luck. Thrown into turmoil, first by the passing of his brother and mother, then his father's business failed, and Christian himself became ill with tuberculosis, it couldn't seem to get worse. Fortunately, he had some very great childhood friends. They were like a surrogate family to him, and were able to collect the funds to have him treated in the Balearic Islands in Spain. His illness made him reevaluate his life. After being cured, Dior worked selling his fashion sketches. This was the time of the Great Depression and the collapse of his father's business. Christian Dior entered the fashion industry through his drawings. Little by little, he entered the world of sequins and embroidery. He was eventually hired to do sketches for the Le Figaro, a newspaper from 1935 until 1942, as well as for various fashion magazines. Making sketches for others encouraged him to develop his own designs and offer them to different fashion houses. He spent time as the sketch artist for Marceau Agnès in Place Vaudon for the designer Elsa Schiaparelli. In 1938, Dior started making sketches for Robert Piguet, an important Parisian designer at the time. In 1941, he began working for the Lucien Lelong team, where he met another important French fashion designer, Pierre Balmain. Dior had no experience with patterns, cloth, or scissors, but he worked as a dressmaker during World War II. Professionally, he began with designs, and then he dared to incorporate needles and thimbles to produce his own creations in the fashion houses where he worked. These firms, in an occupied France, had as customers the wives and girlfriends of Nazi officers. This was a situation that caused him immense pain, since his youngest sister, Catherine, was a member of the French resistance and was captured and sent to the Ravensbrück concentration camp. She survived and was liberated at the end of the war. Christian paid homage to her when he debuted in the world of fragrances with Miss Dior. It was a daring perfume of renovation, with airs of freedom, that took Dior a long time to personally prepare, mixing basic notes of citrus and roses. The passion of Monsieur Dior for flowers materialized with his perfume that was launched simultaneously with his first collection of haute couture in 1947. Christian Dior is considered at the same time a fashion designer and a perfumer. Some of the most sensual aromas and essences in history carry the Dior name. He felt that a dress was only complete when it was accompanied by the right perfume. At the end of the war, in 1945, Christian Dior and Pierre Balmain discussed setting up an independent firm together. But in the end, Balmain dreamed of having his own personal company. And so he did, and in consequence, Dior stayed on as the designer for Lelong. Dior's exquisite taste for art and design made him stand out, and made him one of the most influential men in the fashion world of the time. With the help of the Cotton King of France, the textile entrepreneur Marcel Boussac in 1946, Christian Dior began working on his project to start his own Maison de Haute Couture that was opened at 30 Avenue Montaigne, Paris. That same firm that carried his name, Dior, has been one of the most important luxury brands right up to this day. Fortune teller foretold him a number of times, many years earlier, that he was predestined to enter the realm of myth and legend when he launched his first collection in February 1947. Between February and September 1947, the company's profits multiplied 7 times. The man who transformed haute couture with glamour and style with the founding of his company until his death in 1957 contradicts the extravagant image one tends to have of fashion designers. Dior didn't look for fashion. Fashion found him. The events that led him to make dreams in the form of dresses for high society surprised him as much as anyone else. He was an unaffected man, close to everyday people, one that treated the 900 employees of his impressive business as if they were his family. They made it possible for the creations that he so enjoyed drawing became reality. What are the roots of Dior's exquisite taste? The fountain from which his talent and vocation flowed? What inspired his creativity and made him achieve such amazing success? Surely his infancy in Normandy, his mother's elegance, as well as his love of flowers, art, and architecture will help us to unravel the mystery of the man behind the legend. Christian Dior's father's fortune came from his family's ownership of a fertilizer and chemicals factory. His family was Norman, and thus large and robust, except for his mother, who was from Anjou. In his beautiful pink and gray house, colors that would become constants in his work, Dior acquired his love of flowers, aromas, and colors, as well as his love of silence and solitude. In that isolated mansion at the edge of the sea, surrounded by exotic botanical gardens with the most varied of species, he drew much of his inspiration. Despite his family's wealth, Dior had a modest beginning as a designer. As he affirms in his autobiography, it is due mostly to his not believing in himself, which made it hard for him to gain the confidence to do what he really loved. As a result, he would be a late bloomer and would begin his career as a courtier at 42 years old. In 1946, France was rebuilding after the war when Dior founded his company. Even though cloth was rationed and fabric production was scarce, the designer won over the whole world with his avant-garde vision of feminine elegance and was able to procure the necessary materials for his creations. In this way, Dior helped re-establish Paris as the capital of fashion. In February 1947, he had his inaugural fashion show, presenting the Carla collection, the very first from the Christian Dior company. At 10:30, with the salon bursting at the seams, the first mannequin came out, as Dior remembers in his memoirs, Christian Dior et moi, published in 1956. Marie-Thérèse, half dead from fear, tripped and broke out crying. She was incapable of going out again. But very soon, each new ensemble was received with applause. I covered my ears, too terrified to trust myself so soon. But brief reports from the battlefield confirmed that my troops under the leadership of my favorite mannequin, Tanya, had triumphed. Dior became famous that same year when the journalist Carmel Snow, editor-in-chief of Harper's Bazaar, having seen Christian Dior's fashion show, exclaimed, "It's such a new look." It was a style of design and dressmaking with an aesthetic proposal of narrow shoulders, small waist, tight-fitting over the torso, and an ample skirt in the form of a flower's corolla, halfway down the leg to 11 inches from the floor. On average, the ensemble would use some 20 yards of cloth. Those that were lucky enough to see the show that 12th of February in 1947 were astonished by the beauty of Christian Dior's work. After seeing the models on the catwalk in a theatrical setting, in which they almost danced with exaggerated gestures, wrapped in yards and yards of cloth with wasp-like waists, rounded shoulders, people were amazed at the beauty of Dior's work. It was a transformation of the art of fashion and sewing. It changed the concepts of femininity and elegance, converting Christian Dior into one of the biggest and most profitable symbols of France in the world. However, the British government believed that this way of dressing would cause frustrations in normal women. The high cost of the materials couldn't keep up with the demand of the people that couldn't buy the originals and wanted to reproduce the designs that they saw in magazines with dressmakers. On the other hand, in the United States, multiple public figures said that the French were anti-patriotic. They thought that Europeans should save and not waste resources on the frivolities of fashion. It's easy to appear ridiculous by inserting philosophical reflections in a discussion about silks and satins, But given that I am the person responsible for a social tendency, perhaps I am authorized to analyze my own success. I think that I brought back the neglected art of pleasing, Dior wrote in his autobiography. It was vital for the designer to fill the world with a chic atmosphere, elegance, style, and glamour that would make the times more bearable with dreams full of fashion. The dresses that he created were complemented with original hats, stiletto-heeled shoes, long gloves, and chokers. The bar suit was part of the new look, with its cream-colored jacket, tight at the bust, and a cinched waist with a wide, pleated black wool skirt. Wasp-waisted jackets with padded hips and the houndstooth check, as well as flowers, are still aesthetic characteristics of the brand. These are styles that Dior used for the first time when he worked with Robert Piquet. This representation of classic elegance, this reinvention of femininity and glamour, was the stylized silhouette that dominated the 1950s and transcended magazines by showing up on the silver screen. It was a symbol of the return to luxury after the profound austerity and crisis of the Second World War. Christian Dior interpreted the needs of the female public through his dresses. He reflected optimism and society's hope for a brighter future, which gave the fashion world new impetus. Even though this trend was rapidly accepted by a majority of European and American women, Dior's designs were rejected by one special group: feminists. They sustained that his look was oppressive through the designer's use of such symbols as the corset, the crinoline, and the padding to create his idealized silhouette. Because of this, Coco Chanel became his rival, since her line was designed to be comfortable, elegant, and easy to use. She said that male courtiers tortured women's bodies and that they didn't understand women's true nature. Despite his critics at the time, the Maison Dior almost couldn't satisfy the demands for his products or the famous stars like Rita Hayworth, Margot Fonteyn, among others that bought his ensembles, raising Dior to the altar of adoration of the gods. The designer was invited to organize a private showing of his collection for British royalty. Even though King George V prohibited the princesses Elizabeth and Marguerite to wear the new look, feeling as if it was a bad example for society at a time of austerity. The consolidation of the fashion house, with its sculpted lines, influenced designers for decades, and still does to this day. The world had just come out of World War II, and in this post-war environment, it was difficult to shake off the gray color in people's souls and the military uniforms, the heavy fabrics that didn't allow the female figure to stand out and looked rigid and inelegant. However, Christian Dior was able to transform it all. In 1948, Dior opened his first store in New York City at 730 Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, capitalizing on his popularity, growing fame, and international success. And one after another, a series of events started from there to expand to the rest of the world. In 1949, he created the perfume Diorama, made of fruit, spices, and wood, which, like all Dior fragrances, continues to imbue the world with its aroma even today. In 1950, Dior leapt onto the silver screen when he was chosen to design the wardrobe for Marlene Dietrich in the Alfred Hitchcock film Stage Fright. The German diva looked more mysterious than ever, dressed in the French designer's suits, and directed by the genius of suspense. The other great European designer of the time, Balenciaga, was a purist and focused on the production of his designs in France. But Dior was a globalizer. In only 3 years, he had achieved globalization, having his work span across 5 continents. He was an extraordinarily skillful businessman. In 1951, Princess Margaret of England wore a Dior design to her 21st birthday party, despite her father's previous resistance. This represented the final acceptance by Great Britain of the French invasion through the Maison de Dior. Dior accomplished world fame in just 10 years, from 1947 to 1957. He was a pioneer in the implementation of a brand licensing system for products such as cosmetics and accessories that were made in different parts of the world. This in turn was not well accepted by the French industry. In 1954, he introduced the H line, the flat look with softer and more discreet lines. It was a complete success, a natural evolution of the designs he had created earlier. In a pearl gray, perfumed room on the Avenue Montaigne in Paris, Christian Dior lowered the women's waist to the hips, flattened the bust, and returned fashion to the jazz age of the 1920s. It was the most important change in 7 years. Roger Vivier was in charge of designing Dior's line of shoes, creating shoes with the Massot's signature houndstooth check. That same year, for the first time ever, a Dior collection was presented in a major fashion show in the Soviet Union. Dior was revolutionizing the world. But what is a fashion designer without his muses transfigured into women of flesh and bone? In the 50s, the relationship between the designer and his models was very close and intense, since the clothes were made directly on them. His favorite model was Victor Dautrelot, who declared that the designer worked with a dozen girls that were available in his workshop from 10 a.m. until 3 a.m. for 3 months when preparing his current collection. The models had a lot of contact with him, but only professionally. Dior was indifferent to the bohemian lifestyle and the mundane pleasures of socializing. Dior usually met with friends in his home, the majority being childhood friends. He also liked going to the theater or classical music recitals, but he was introverted and thus fled crowds and noise. His great passion, motivation, and purpose was his work. It was what made him feel complete and in no need of diversion. It was the same year that the new headquarters were opened and that Dior gave lectures at the Sorbonne as a consecrated maestro of fashion. Around 1954, he decided to once again conquer the clientele in Latin America that had once invested in high fashion and had lost touch because of the Second World War. And he did a promotional tour with his French models through Venezuela, Colombia, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Haiti, and Mexico. Huge fortunes, fervent for Parisian glamour, could be found in that part of the world, which the French considered exotic lands. In September 1954, in association with the Cartier firm, Monsieur Dior inaugurated the Christian Dior boutique on Francisco de Miranda Avenue, one of the most cosmopolitan in the prosperous city of Caracas. Dior was fascinated by South America and affirmed in an interview that year when asked which queen would he have most liked to dress, he answered that the only queen he had dressed was Eva Perón. He came to have a unique connection with the charismatic Evita, so much so that he had a mannequin with the exact measurements of the Argentinian First Lady in his atelier. In 1955, Yves Saint Laurent At the time, a 19-year-old youth came to work as the first and only assistant that Christian Dior had during his life. Yves Saint Laurent was one of the designer's great discoveries and was his protégé. Though they were very different, Saint Laurent was a close friend, confidant, and disciple, learning by starting from pattern making and going all the way up to confectioning suits with the unique seal of his maestro. The headquarters at 30 Avenue Montaigne remains today and is a point of reference for fashion lovers. In 1957, Dior was the first fashion designer to appear on the cover of Time magazine just before dying of his third heart attack at the Montecatini Spa in Tuscany, Italy. His funeral was attended by all his faithful followers, who mourned him as someone very esteemed and close. Beyond the fashion world, he was one of the most known and respected Frenchmen in the world, responsible for 50% of the high fashion exports from his country. He died young, but even so, he had created an empire of clothing, perfumes, and cosmetics. The premature death of Dior made Marcel Boussac consider closing the fashion house, but the chairman, Jacques Rouet, convinced him to give this immense responsibility to the younger designer, Yves Saint Laurent. In the spring of 1958, Yves Saint Laurent's first collection, called Trapeze, was a resounding success. In 1959, Farah Diba married the Shah of Iran dressed in a gown from Dior, becoming the empress of what was once ancient Persia. At 23 years old, Yves Saint Laurent managed to conserve the elegance and opulence inherited from his mentor, adding a lightness to the garments. The 70s arrived, and with them the winds of change and revolution, something that didn't fit into the rigid mental schemes of some of the rich followers of the Maison. Saint Laurent transformed the Dior creations, modernizing them and making contemporary icons with a perfect balance of good taste and practicality. Later, under the proclamation of "Down with the Ritz, long live the street," Saint Laurent presented his last collection for Dior in 1961, in homage to the students of the Rive Gauche, the most bohemian and rebellious of the Parisian neighborhoods. In that collection, he introduced leather jackets and miniskirts. The idea wasn't well received by the more conservative sectors and was seen almost as an offense. Taking advantage of his being called up for military service, the Algerian-born designer was replaced by Marc Bohan, a much more traditional figure. The House of Dior entered a quiet period in which there were no radical changes. In 1967, the brand was 20 years old. Dior was a company that had expanded its business to 15 countries and employed more than 2,000 people. It had diversified its business into different luxury products, like perfumes, jewelry, and watches, with enormous sales success. The empire of La Maison expanded in other directions by presenting its ready-to-wear and baby Dior lines. This is the same year that they made the dress for the coronation of the Empress of Iran, for whom they also made a wedding dress. The Empress, in turn, would be one of the most adoring fans of the high fashion firm during her lifetime. 3 years later, in 1970, a masculine line of designs made its debut, Dior Monsieur, breaking paradigms in men's fashion. In 1976, the Dior Maison dressed Queen Sylvia of Sweden when she married King Carl Gustaf. Soon came the colorful and vibrant era of the 80s. In 1982, Princess Grace of Monaco wore Dior for Diana Spencer's and Prince Charles' wedding. In 1985, Bernard Arnault, a French businessman, and Louis Vuitton owner Moet Hennessy became the chairman and managing director of Dior. The front office move was an historical transaction in the world of finance. That same year, the beautiful actor and diva of the moment in French cinema, Isabelle Adjani, became the image of the vanguard fragrance, Poison. The hypnotic, dreamlike, and addictive aroma distinguished the fragrance from the rest. In 1986, the first Dior collection was presented in Communist China, once again prevailing to revolutionize the history and markets of the fashion world. It is the same year that Carlotta Casiraghi, the daughter of Princess Carolina of Monaco, faithful follower of the ensembles from the French firm, is baptized wearing Dior. Marc Bohan maintained his position at the helm of the company for 29 years before he retired in 1989. The Italian Gianfranco Ferri was then appointed creative director of the company. For the first time, an Italian was put in charge of the important fashion house, an emblem of the French nation. This, of course, was a scandal for many, sparingly considered to be unacceptable and disturbing. Gianfranco Ferri was a designer and architect. He had his own fashion company, which he quit to dedicate his body and soul to the French fashion house. The commitment confirmed that Christian Dior's ghost would not influence him, and that he would produce Ferri collections made by Dior. And in fact, the Italian imposed his own personal imprint, full of brightness and color. It was much more Baroque, almost excessively ornate and rococo, but fascinating everyone with the splendor of the times that appeared peaceful. With the end of the Cold War, the world was transformed by the age of modern warfare. Notably, with the perestroika, the fall of the Soviet Union, as well as the fall of the Berlin Wall, which meant the reunification of Germany, the Balkan War, and the Gulf War reshaped everything. In the 90s, Dior opened stores in Tokyo, New York, and Los Angeles in response to the demand in multiple international markets. This was the era of the original top models: Cindy Crawford, Linda Evangelista, Carla Bruni, Claudia Schiffer, Christy Turlington, Naomi Campbell, Elle Macpherson, Helena Christensen, and Stephanie Seymour. Ferre put them all on the Dior runway and put them on covers across the entire fashion universe with designs from La Maison, marrying the brand to women who made fashion history. In 1995, Lady Dior was created. It was one of the brand's most emblematic bags, made in honor of Princess Diana of Wales, a grand admirer of fashion. She would use many Dior designs while on the front pages around the whole world, wearing its creations at charity events and political, aristocratic, and royal galas. Ferre left the brand with the intention of returning to his own company, and on the 20th of January 1997, at the Grand Hotel de Paris, the Englishman John Galliano took creative control during the company's 50th anniversary. The president, Bernard Arnault, said that Galliano possessed a creative talent similar to that of Christian Dior, and that the founder of the company would have loved Galliano's work. He would add that they shared the same extraordinary mixture of romanticism and modernity. The Galliano era speedily brought a series of events that transformed the brand, involving it more and more with celebrities. For example, the English designer was the creator of some of Dior's most famous gowns, including the lime green, Oriental-inspired dress that Nicole Kidman wore at the 1997 Academy Awards show in Hollywood. In 1999, Gwyneth Paltrow, who received the Oscar that year for Shakespeare in Love, was designated as the image for the new Dior handbag, City Dior. In that same year, J'adore, a perfume with a sweet aroma of flowers and fruit, was launched. That year, the man from Gibraltar presented a collection that modernized the Dior inheritance with ethereal and delicate designs of corsets, sumptuous gala dresses, and a grand mixture of cultures, especially Spanish. The fashion critics loved his offering. In this way, the beginning of the new millennium brought big changes for Dior. For instance, in 2002, selecting the sensational Brazilian model Gisele Bündchen, who was dating actor Leonardo DiCaprio at the time, as the new image for the spring-summer collection. The designs from the Maison de Dior invaded the red carpet at the awards shows. Charlize Theron picked up the Golden Globe as Best Actress for her work in Monster while wearing a Dior gown. A short time later, she would become the face of J'adore. Reese Witherspoon received the Best Actress Oscar for her work in Walk the Line while wearing a vintage Dior dress from the 1950s. And Penelope Cruz presented the film Volver by the Spaniard Pedro Almodóvar at Cannes wearing a Galliano-designed gown. Galliano loved fashion history while simultaneously recognizing the possibilities to make new narratives. He also found inspiration in haute couture, and it was reflected in the technical details in which he made his garments. In 2005, Sharon Stone became the image of Dior's line of anti-aging cosmetics. The famous French actress, Marion Cotillard, who won the Oscar for her interpretation of Edith Piaf in 2008, was selected to be the new icon for the brand's advertising campaigns. Later in 2010, the British actor Jude Law became the face of the cologne Dior Homme. The campaign, directed by Guy Ritchie, who was married to Madonna, another habitué of the Maison Dior. In 2011, the director Sofia Coppola directed Natalie Portman in a new commercial for Miss Dior, Chérie. That year, some anti-Semitic comments by Galliano while drunk in a Parisian bar provoked his arrest and eventually his being fired from the company. And so ended his career at Dior. The company was unexpectedly without leadership and looking for a successor. A year later, the Belgian Raf Simons, fresh from his success at Jil Sander, was named creative director at Dior. The reconceptualization and modernization of the historic Christian Dior legacy were the basis that sustained Simons' offerings at Dior. In 2012, the actress of the moment and the new image of the brand, Jennifer Lawrence, won the Golden Globe as the Best Supporting Actress in Silver Linings Playbook while wearing a Dior gown designed by Simons. At the same gala, Emma Watson surprised everyone by wearing a daring ensemble from Dior that combined a backless red dress with black capri pants. In 2013, Robert Pattinson, the star of the Twilight Saga, became the new face of Dior Homme. That same year, Charlize Theron wore a gown from Dior Couture at the Oscar Gala. In 2015, the legendary French actor Alain Delon, in images used from his 1967 film The Last Adventure, became the voice of Eau Sauvage perfume. That same year, Raf Simons announced that he would not be renewing his contract with Dior after 3.5 years working with Maison Dior. He said that after profound reflection, he decided to leave his post as creative director and that his decision was based on his desire to pursue other interests. In 2016, Rihanna, the hip-hop and pop singer from Barbados, designed a pair of sunglasses with her name on them that were produced by Dior. 6 months after Simon's departure, and after 3 weeks of rumors, Maria Grazia Chiuri was named as the new Christian Dior's creative director. She was the first woman to occupy the post in the history of the Maison, and her reign began with an extraordinary fashion show called Dior Sauvage that was presented in the Upper Las Virgenes Canyon Nature Preserve in California. Chiuri took over women's haute couture, the prêt-à-porter, and the accessory collections under the denomination stamped on a t-shirt, "We all should be feminists." The Italian wanted to reinvent Dior and redesign its concept of femininity. Chiuri had spoken with fashion editors about the influence that Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes had on her, about the archetype of the wild woman, and attempts by the patriarchy to repress this feminine force in society. The designer, who first worked for Fendi and later Valentino, affirmed that she was in a constant search to evoke Dior's legacy and had accomplished internalizing his savoir-faire adjusting to modern trends with a collection faithful to Dior's essence and authentic with history and significance. The line was, at the same time, made for today's woman, in that it combines femininity with strength, as well as balance between professional life with being a housewife and mother. This was her case as well, to become creative director for Dior. There have been countless achievements by the legendary French Maison in its 70 years. The Maison Dior entered the male fashion world with the Dior Homme name, a revolution comparable to the one the new look brought to Christian Dior at the end of the 1940s. The male collections from Dior had Dior Monsieur labels, and with the arrival of A.D. Slimane at Dior in 2000 came the new man. Slimane designed a slim silhouette, tight-fitting androgynous look, inspired by the rock and roll aesthetic. Slimane declared that the influence of music in fashion was enormous and can be seen in Dior since the 60s with Yves Saint Laurent through to the 80s with Gaultier. The relation goes from rock to so-called street culture. The Frenchman left the firm a bit later to concentrate on his photography career. Chris Van Asche succeeded him and continued the legacy, presenting his first spring-summer collection in 2008. It followed the same line, as much in form as in color. Among the celebrities that have adored Dior throughout its history are stars such as Marilyn Monroe, Sophia Loren, Sarah Jessica Parker, Diane Kruger, Jessica Biel, Bella Hadid, Mila Kunis, Emma Stone, and Dita Von Teese. Other favorite clients have been the French former First Lady, Carla Bruni, who was also one of the brand's spoiled top models in the times of Farah. Melania Trump, Flotus, a devotee of fashion and haute couture, chose a Dior ensemble for her first official visit to France. According to the magazine Bilan, Bernard Arnault, the French magnate and leader of LVMH, to which Dior belongs, is the richest man in France and the second richest in the European Union. LVMH is home to 70 distinguished brands belonging to 6 different sectors of the fashion industry, with 1,508 stores. Faithful to their historic traditions, each of its brands is based on the legacy that maintains a solid focus on the exquisite quality of its products. 70 years after its creation, the Dior Group sees billions of dollars every year. Christian Dior changed the rules of what is elegant all around the world with the collection he launched in 1947 and continues to be synonymous with imagination, creativity, originality, class, and innovation. I will only say that elegance should be a combination of distinction, naturality, care, and simplicity. Christian Dior.